I highly encourage you to Google more about him. You really should, especially to listen to his 2014 commencement address at UT Austin. But for now, here's a brief bio on our guest speaker. Bill McRaven recently retired as a 4-star admiral after 37 years as a Navy SEAL and became Chancellor of the University of Texas System in January 2015. McRaven's last assignment with the Navy was commander of the U.S. Special Operations Command, during which time he led a force of 69,000 men and women. As leader of Special Operations, he was responsible for conducting counterterrorism operations worldwide. Admiral McRaven is also as a recognized national authority on U.S. foreign policy and has advised Presidents Bush and Obama and other U.S. leaders on defense issues. He has also advised foreign heads of state in Afghanistan, Iraq, Jordan, and Yemen on U.S. counterterrorism policy. Admiral McRaven also spearheaded the creation of the Preservation of the Force and Family Initiative, calling it a moral imperative to take care of the mental, spiritual, and physical well-being of those who serve in Special Operations Forces, as well as their families. Born in North Carolina, the son of an Air Force colonel, McRaven spent most of his childhood growing up in San Antonio, where he graduated from Roosevelt High School. He graduated from the University of Texas at Austin with a degree in journalism and received, it's instinctual, I'm sorry, and received his master's degree from the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey. At this time, please help me welcome a Texas legend to the stage, a humble, visionary, and servant leader, and a good friend of mine and the Rio Grande Valley, the Chancellor of the UT System, Admiral Bill McRaven.
Thanks, Nancy. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, please. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Nolan. It is terrific to be here in the Valley. And Art, I want to repeat what I said this morning. Rarely have I seen a superintendent who has as much passion, as much pride, and as much professionalism as your superintendent does. I am incredibly impressed with the work that he does and the work that the entire HCISD does. So Art, again, congratulations for the terrific work here at Harlingen. I also want to recognize the Board of Trustees. I had an opportunity to have lunch with a few of them today. They really have, again, a great passion for the work that goes on here at HCISD. And as you all know, if you don't have a strong Board of Trustees, the ability to move the independent school district forward is very, very difficult. So I commend you on the magnificent work that you have done and the magnificent work that you will continue to do. So thank you all very much. And for Art and his senior team, again, terrific team. This is, as he will be the first to say, this is about the teamwork. And when I look at the leadership down here, it is apparent why the school district is doing so very, very well. So thank you all as well. And I would be remiss if I also didn't point out, and I know they've been recognized, but I really want to take a minute. One of my very favorite regents, Ernie Aliseda, is here today. He is a Texas A&M graduate on the Board of Regents, of the University of Texas, and he is without a doubt, one of the finest regents we have. Ernie, thank you so very much for all your support and for what you've done for the Valley. And also, there was recognized earlier, Dean Fernandez. Dean, I'm so excited about the medical school at UTRGV, and I know you're getting very close. I want to thank you for all the hard work that you have put into that as well, so thanks. As I said, I'm really honored to be here today. I come from a family of educators. My grandfather and my great-grandfather were both doctors, but in the course of being medical doctors, as a number of the physicians here know, they were also teachers. And my mother was an elementary school teacher. Her sister was an elementary school teacher. My oldest sister was actually a high school teacher. And my other sister just received her PhD in education. So we are a family of educators. And I really do appreciate the incredible work that you do as teachers every day. My mother was an English teacher. And she really had this great sense of what was important for me growing up. And she loved poetry, and she loved quotes, but her favorite poem was the Rudyard Kipling poem, If. And I know many of you have heard it, and back in the 70s and the 80s, the poem was so prevalent that I think it lost a little bit of its power. But from the time I first heard the poem, and Rudyard Kipling was a British soldier, he was a British scholar, and he was both a poet and a short storyteller. And I think this poem tells you really everything you need to know about being a man or a woman in this world, and also what you need to know as teachers as you are trying to teach the young men and women under your care and how to be great citizens and how to be great students. So if you'll bear with me, again, the poem is entitled If. And it says, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you but make allowances for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aims, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to broken and stoop and build them up with worn-out tools, if you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of the pitch and toss and lose and start at the beginnings and never breathe a word about your loss, if you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your term long after they are gone, and so hold on when there is nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son. My mother felt that was an incredibly important poem and an example for me as a young man to grow up to. And so I would tell you, as you go about educating the young men and women under your care, you have to think about these very, very important points. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs, how many times do you see this? If you can be lied about and not deal in lies, if you can be hated and not deal in hate, these are very, very important life lessons. And I think the point of an education is not so much what you learn in the school books, but it's what you as teachers are teaching your young men and women as they grow up to be great citizens of this magnificent country. Education is one of those things that changes everything about a nation. Education reduces fear and bigotry and racism and inequality. Education brings dignity and respect. Education provides new opportunities. And above all, a good education gives hope and a belief in the future. From 2003 to about 2011, I spent a lot of time in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I watched in Iraq and Afghanistan as the American soldiers, along with their Iraqi counterparts, and then Afghanistan, along with their Afghan counterparts, would fight to make sure that the schools stayed open. In Afghanistan in particular, in an area called Helmand Province, there was a young girls' school. And every night the Taliban, who were the enemy fighters, they would come in and they would put landmines around the schools because they didn't want the young girls to go to school. And we had the opportunity to kind of watch, and every day we would go in and we'd defuse the mines and we'd take the mines out so the young ladies could go to school. And this went on again and again and again. And it wasn't just in Helmand Province, it was around. They did not want the young women to get an education because they realized what an education would do to their perverted sense of justice and of tolerance. And yet the young women kept coming. And sometimes at great cost to them, at sometimes at great cost to the American soldier, at sometimes at great cost to the Afghan and the Iraqi soldiers, we all understood the value of an education. I've seen it in Mali, in Africa, in Chad, in Colombia, in Peru, in the Philippines, in Indonesia. Every obstacle in their path, people would overcome so they could go to a one-room shack to go to school because they understood the value of an education. So when you have to overcome tremendous odds, you have this entirely new appreciation for education. And so as I as I come down here to the Valley, to Harlingen, and I see the great work you are doing, I would ask you to take a hard look at the obstacles that are in your way. Because frankly, it is always easy to look at those obstacles and say, you know, those obstacles, those barriers are just too great for us. But they're never too great. I will tell you, as I have traveled around the University of Texas system and talked to a number of my folks, every once in a while, I will hear someone say, but Chancellor, you just don't understand. The young men and women that come to my school, they're very poor. Or Chancellor, you just don't understand. The men and women that come to my school, the students, they don't speak good enough English, and sometimes that's hard. Or you don't understand, Chancellor, they come to our school and they come from broken families, and it's hard to get them educated. Of course it's hard. That's why this job is so very, very important. But as you get ready for this school year, you have to make sure that there are no excuses. Because at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're changing not one life, but you're changing a generation. You heard Art talk about it. I mentioned earlier today, my predecessor, Francisco Figueroa, his family has, I think, 5 or 6 medical doctors within their family. He grew up here in the Valley. There is nothing you can't do to overcome these obstacles on behalf of your students. Another thing my mother used to love to quote was a line from Henry Adams, and Henry Adams was a 19th century historian, scholar. He was also the descendant of the 2 Adams presidents. And he used to say that teachers affect eternity. Teachers affect eternity because their influence goes on and on and on. The other day, we were having our Board of Regents meeting, and the chair of the Faculty Advisory Council, Ann Killery, reminded myself and the regents about my remarks last year at the University of Texas when I was talking to the graduating students, and there were 8,000 of them. And I said, you know, if every one of you only affects 10 people in your life, and they affect 10 people, and those affect 10 people, then in a couple of generations, you will have affected 800 million people. This is your job. This is what you will do when you affect the students in your classroom. You will change their lives, you will change their children's lives and their children's children's lives. The work you do is so very, very important. You cannot let any obstacles step in the way. When I was going to school in San Antonio, I was in 6th grade, and I had admittedly a crush on my math teacher, Mrs. Domanevsky. But I was not a particularly good student. And I was sitting in class, and of course, I'm not sure how it is here in the Valley, but in San Antonio back in the 60s, the schools had no air conditioning, because the school got out by May, and so we couldn't afford air conditioning, so the schools, you got out in May, you came back in late August, and there was no AC. So I remember it being a particularly warm day, and it is amazing to this day how much I remember about this particular incident with Miss Domanevsky. So she was teaching something at the class, and I was sitting kind of in the back of the class, and I was gazing out the window, and it was a warm day, and the windows were open. There were those kind of louvered windows, and there was a man out on the field who was teaching his dog how to fetch and bringing the dog back down and teaching the dog after he fetched, he had to come and sit. And they were going through this again and again and again. And the man was kind of constantly teaching, and they were building this relationship. And it was I was fascinated by how he would toss it and the dog would come back and he'd teach the dog something. But at some point in time, Mrs. Domanevsky kind of knocks on the board, and the chalkboard, and she says, "Bill, are you paying attention?" And she caught me. And instead of chastising me, she said, "What are you looking at?" And of course, she looked out the window, saw the man who was throwing the stick to the dog. She got the whole class up, and she said, "Let's all go to the window." Class got up, we went to the window, and she tutored the class. And I was standing by her side, and she said, "Do you know why he's doing this? It's because it's the only way to get better. If you do it again and again and again, and if you work hard," and he and the dog are a team in this case, but the example applies to anything. You have to work hard, you have to repeat it, you have to get better and better at it. I never forgot that lesson. I never in my life forgot that lesson. And there were times as you go through life, you wonder, how do I get better? You work hard and you repeat it and you repeat excellence again and again and again, and you don't rest on anything other than the best. I want to fast forward a couple of years because another great example in my life that kind of changed my life in the right direction. As I was running at Roosevelt High School, I was a senior on the track team. Excuse me. And it was coming close towards the end of the season. In fact, it was my last meet, and I was trying to break the mile record. The mile record at the time was 4 minutes and 32 seconds, 0.7. And the meet before I had run, and it had not been very good. And I was depressed that I was so close, but I was afraid I wasn't going to get there. And Thursday night, I was at home waiting, and the meet was on a Friday, and I was at home, and my father said, "There's a phone call for you." So I went in, and I picked up the phone, and it was a fellow named Coach Jerry Turnbow. Coach Turnbow had been a track and football coach at Roosevelt High School, but he had left 18 months earlier. And when you're a young man, you look up at the coaches and you put them on pedestals. No coach calls you at home. Coaches only scream at you on the field. That's what coaches do. But he called me at home and he said, "Bill, I understand you've got one meet left to break the school record." And he said, "You can do this. You can do this. All you have to do is run your hardest. All you have to do is give it your best, and you'll break the record." And the next day, I broke the record. I look back over 40 years on single points in your life that made a difference and that led you off on a path. Because I was able to break that record, and frankly, I was the only one that really knew about the record or cared about the record, but it had been something I was striving for. And it was something I was able to achieve because a coach, who was also a teacher, as you know, and I'm sure it's the same way today, a lot of the coaches are teachers, that coach understood that I needed just a little bit of motivation, a little bit of push. And I was able to tell Coach that story 40 years later. After the bin Laden raid, I had the opportunity, and somebody was interviewing me, and I went back 40 years, and I said, my life was changed because a coach, a teacher, put me on the right path, told me that I could achieve things, and I never looked back. I said, if all I got to do is work hard, I set my goals and I keep moving. The impact you can have as teachers is absolutely phenomenal, and you will do this day in and day out. And I just can't tell you how much I appreciate the hard work you put into this. In the end, we have to set the standards. We have to put the bar high. When I went through basic SEAL training in 1977, it is probably one of the more rigorous trainings in the military. And it is at times, almost brutal. But there is a compassion because of the quality of the training. In that, if you do not do well, and if you don't succeed, and if the instructors don't teach you how to be a good Navy SEAL, it is not only going to affect your life, it's going to affect the lives of the men around you. It's hard, and it's tough, and there are standards. And at times it doesn't seem compassionate until you're in battle. And then you realize that all the hard work you put into it, all the things my teachers that taught me in SEAL training teach you, all that they did to push me to be better is what made me successful in the long run. As I said, you'll have a lot of opportunities to find reasons why sometimes the kids can't achieve. Don't accept any of them. Set the bar high. Drive them, help them, nurture them. When you got that kid that's way in the back of the class and he's drifting a little bit, pat him on the back every once in a while. Lift him up. Take that and make that a teaching moment. If you do that, you will continue to affect eternity and to affect the lives of millions of people in the years to come. And let me just kind of end on one final note. Again, as I said, I had an opportunity to watch my mother and my sisters as I was growing up. And my mother in particular, she was not only a military wife, as I said, she was also a teacher. And I realize how difficult the job is. I realize how passionate teachers are about the job that they do. But I also realize that there are pay inequities, that sometimes you don't get everything you need. And the great teachers step up and they push through it anyway. But I remember how hard my mother worked to be a great teacher. And I know how hard each and every one of you worked to be a great teacher. And I know that your families have got to be part of this, and they have to buy into the hard work that you do. And I wanted to let you know how very, very much I appreciate that. So without further ado, thank you again so very much for the work you're doing here. And I'm very pleased to have had the opportunity to come down today and talk to you. And I look forward to taking a few Q&As from Art here momentarily. Thank you very much.
So first, let me say, Chancellor, that I sit here breathless, realizing the enormity of having you here in Harlingen and realizing your commitment to our great country. We were taught early on as children that people in the military write a blank check to this great country and give up their lives for us. And so I thank you on behalf of HCISD for everything you did and continue to do for this great country.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, Art.
So as I was working on the questions, I thought I'd ask you the questions they asked me when I became superintendent. I'm kidding, Chancellor. They had 60 for me, I only have 30. So let's move. In our great country, education is still seen as the greatest equalizer of opportunities. And as educators, we contribute to the achievement of our advancement of our society. What do you believe, Chancellor, are the most critical skill sets for our students to possess as they leave the public school system and enter the world of post-secondary studies and in general the world?
Yeah, thanks, Art. I mean, I think there's two things I'd offer. And I've seen, obviously, your 4 C's, and I think you really, frankly, I think that's a terrific way to look at it. But critical thinking, to me, is probably the most important of the skills. Because, frankly, as I have gone through my military career, the leaders I'm looking for are ones that can think their way through difficult situations. And that's no hit on those that are generating through the STEM field, because I think making sure we have the right engineers and the right computer scientists, but we've got to make sure that whether they're engineers or anthropologists or zoologists or physicists, that they have both, one, a broad understanding of the liberal arts. I'm a big believer in the importance of the liberal arts, but more importantly, they have to have that critical thinking skill so that they can think through difficult situations, because difficult situations don't generally lend themselves to formulas. Formulas are great, but they won't solve kind of interpersonal problems. They won't solve how to deal with a team in a classroom. You really have to be able to think critically and build those interpersonal skills. And I would say the second thing I would ask as students begin to come up is, we need to continue to teach them manners. Manners, it is irrespective of where you come from. I came from a very middle-class family. The folks, it doesn't make a difference. When your parents raise you well, they will teach you good manners, and if the parents aren't, then unfortunately, sometimes it will fall upon the teachers to do that. And I can tell you, my mother, if I ever met somebody and I didn't say, yes, sir, no, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, there was going to be a little hell to pay. And she understood that importance.
Well, I try and suppress some of these thoughts, but I remember my mother teaching her manners. And it went something like this: bring me my sandal. Yeah. So even though she had 2 on, and we did it, and then it was held to pay.
So I think what we can do, Art, is we can issue everybody sandals.
That's
then.
right. That's right. That's exactly right. So you kind of highlighted our.
Are we on video, by the way?
Yes. You highlighted the 4 C's that
Right.
it grounds our strategic plan, where we believe that we have to provide opportunities for children throughout our schools, an opportunity for creativity, collaboration, critical thinking, and communication, and ground our learning there. How important is collaboration as an overarching goal of post-secondary?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely critical. I mean, collaboration and communications, and let me give you kind of 2 examples. I was a journalism major, as I think Nolan mentioned, coming out of the University of Texas. And a lot of people said, you know, how good could that have been for your military career? I mean, a journalism major? And I got to tell you, it was probably one of the best skills you could have had, because it is important, I think, in the military, or whether you're running an independent school district, you have to have the ability to communicate clearly, your thoughts clearly, whether in writing or in a public forum like this where you're speaking to an audience. These are incredibly important skills. And you know, we worked hard in the military from the time, you know, a young non-commissioned officer comes in or a young officer comes in to teach them those skills, because life is about learning to communicate. Part 2 of that is, of course, collaboration. And again, I'm a product of my experience, but in the military, if you don't collaborate, you die. It's pretty simple. You have to have that team.
Hold on, Chancellor.
Yes.
Okay.
So you have to have that teamwork to make things happen. As the presidents of the universities know, both on the health side and the academic side, and I have had an opportunity over the course of the last 8 months to spend a lot of time with the presidents. As I think you know, we've got 9 academic institutions and 6 health science institutions. And I have talked to them about the value of collaboration. And across the system, you know, we have these great institutions. We have to do a better job of playing to our strengths. We have these great, you know, size is an advantage to us, but not only that, we have these kind of centers of excellence at a number of the universities. And imagine what you get if you can pull all those together. Instead of having these separate silos, you begin to collaborate, and the power of the collaboration is exponentially better than a single location. So we're working hard to collaborate, and everything, and of course Frank Fernandez will tell you, between the medical school here at UTRGV and the medical school at Dell, what they're learning early is, as a doctor, if you're going to teach a doctor, you're going to teach him as a team now. It's not just about the surgeon all by himself. The surgeon has to understand how to work with the nurse and how to work with the staff. This is the nature of the world we're in today. The more we collaborate, the more we communicate, the more powerful and the better we're going to be. So I get back to your 4 C's. I mean, I probably could have, you know, spent 10 years trying to come up with a better, you know, 4 examples of what we need to teach, but you nailed it. Those are exactly the 4 C's you need to move people into higher education.
We'll lend them to you, Chancellor.
Thank you.
You kind of talked a little bit about, you know, adversity, and you know, oftentimes here in Harlingen we talk about, as we roll out some action ideas that come from the strategic plan, we say, let's focus on the opportunity,
right,
and minimize the risk. In times of great adversity, how do you ensure fidelity to the mission, and how do you inspire others to charge on and take the advantage over the competitors?
Yeah, it's a great question. Let me touch on adversity a little bit. It is one of the things, and I would offer to your educators out there, learning to fail and dust yourself off and keep moving is probably one of the greatest skills you can teach your students. Because as we go through life, we're all going to fail. We're all going to fall down. And if we haven't learned how to pick ourselves up and keep moving, then we're never going to be successful. I look back in my life, and when I was a young lieutenant, I was about 26 years old, I got one of the premier jobs within the Navy SEALs. I was in command of the most elite group of Navy SEALs with some of the best equipment and the best mission in the world, and I was fired. So it's never good to get fired, particularly not in the Navy. And it was a very humbling experience. Now, there were a lot of reasons why I got fired, but at the end of the day, I was fired. And so, you know, you have to say, well, you know, let me look inside myself and figure out, what did I do wrong? Why did I get fired? I mean, you can't try to blame it on somebody else. You have to look inside and determine why and what mistakes you made. And then you've got to decide whether you're going to press on. because I was telling the group a little bit earlier today, when you're fired in a small unit, again, recognizing that the Navy SEALs back then, we had about a little less than 200 officers and about 400 or 500 enlisted men. And so when you get fired, everybody knows it. And for the next several years, you'd meet somebody and they'd shake your hand, they'd say, "Hey, Bill, how you doing?" And you knew what they were thinking. They were thinking, "You got fired." And you knew they were thinking that, and you had to work to overcome it. You had to work to prove that you were better than that. And so in time, I got a second chance. So there was an officer, a senior officer, who said, I actually think you're a pretty good officer, and I'm going to give you a second chance. And you had an opportunity to take advantage of that second chance. But it does get back to this concept of kind of learning to fail. And I will tell you that was kind of, again, a pivotal moment for me in my career. As I got into combat, really in 2003 for me, starting off in Iraq and then going from Iraq to Afghanistan, unfortunately, you fail more than you'd like. And in combat, when you fail, it sometimes costs people their lives. And if you allow that to consume you, you'll never make the next hard decision that you have to make as a leader. When you fail, you've got to pick yourself up, you have to do an evaluation, you've got to figure out how you're going to get better, and then you got to take a deep breath and keep moving forward. Because if you don't, then you're just going to keep falling back and you'll never be able to recover from it. So I think for me as a leader, and as I get an opportunity over the course of my career to see young men and women, and they will occasionally fail. And I think I know how to deal with it. I know how to help lift them up without coddling them, without patting them on the back too much, but you got to lift them up and they've got to be able to overcome that hurdle the next time. But you were talking about, how do kind of institutions operate in a crisis? Many years ago, I was on a Southwest Airlines plane, and I picked up a copy. I was sitting back there in, row 32, right next to the latrine, which for some reason I always seem to be in that row that's all the way in the back.
I'm sure you're not there anymore.
Yeah,
right, Chancellor?
And you're right, good point.
I saw what you landed in today.
Touche. And I picked up a copy of Southwest magazine. And it was an article on Herb Kelleher, who had been the CEO of Southwest Airlines in the 70s. And it was a great article. And so, again, I want to say this was about 10 or 12 years ago, I think, when I was reading the article. And in the article, it's talking about Herb Kelleher's approach in the 70s. So in the 70s, tremendous economic crisis. Everything was kind of going downhill. And the big airlines decided that they needed to protect themselves. And in the airline business, it's about owning gates. Do you own gates at Dallas-Fort Worth? Do you own gates, in Atlanta? Well, the big airlines, TWA, Eastern, Braniff, they all sold off their gates to protect the core. That was about, we want to reduce the risk as much as possible to protect the core. And Herb Kelleher said, I'm going to buy up all the gates. I'm going to reach out and I'm going to mortgage everything I've got to buy up all the gates so that I will be properly positioned when this economic turns around. And of course, you look at the wisdom of that philosophy, and TWA, Braniff, and Eastern aren't around anymore, and Southwest Airlines is the #1 airlines in the country. So it is something that, again, I learned, and as I became, and I've been in charge of many large organizations, I realized that in the middle of a crisis, the great organizations look for opportunities. You have to understand you're going to have to take risk. You're going to have to take risk in a good market. You're going to have to take risk in a bad market. You have to understand the risk, but you have to be prepared to take risks, or your organization is never going to flourish. And when you're in the middle of a crisis, look for the opportunities. I think Herb Kelleher looked for it well, and I can tell you over my career, I've been in a lot of crises. You look for those opportunities.
It's amazing. Let's give him a hand. So, Chancellor, the accomplishments of the team you led during the search and capture of Osama bin Laden has been recognized around the world. How has that experience impacted your leadership, and how does it advance your work now?
Yeah, Art, you told me you've been the superintendent for how long?
It feels like, no. I'm starting my third year.
Third year, okay. And you've been in education for how long?
Well, I started real young, but this is I'm starting my 32nd year.
32nd year. So that's almost exactly where I was when I led the bin Laden raid. I was in my 32nd year of being in the military. Actually, I think it would have been my 34th year. 34th year in the military. The point was, by the time I led the bin Laden raid, I had a tremendous amount of experience, and certainly in combat. In fact, at one point in time, as we were ramping up for the raid, and don't quote me, but I think it was Secretary Clinton, who asked me, how many times have you done missions like this? And I told her I've done almost 10,000 of them in terms of either been on them, overseen them from a command and control perspective, or approved them, looking at the mission and saying, yeah, that looks good, and approving it. And that was really from 2003 to about 2011. So what I'd offer to you is, if you went back to 2003, when I first kind of got into combat in Iraq, the first day I arrived in Iraq, it was late one night, and I had just taken over from an Air Force general officer who was there, and he said, hey, you got it? I'm hopping on the next plane. I'm heading out of Iraq. I said, okay. Oh, boy, this will be good. So as soon as I got there, the very first mission we're running that night is there's a compound out in Al-Ramadi, which is out in the western part of Iraq. And we were going after a bad guy out in a compound, and it looked like it was going to be a pretty straightforward operation. So we would take Army Special Operations guys, they'd get on a couple of helicopters, they would fly the helicopters in, kind of land outside this built-up compound. And normally we actually brought out a bullhorn and said, okay, everybody come out with your hands up. And when you're surrounded by a bunch of Rangers and Army Special Forces guys, people tend to go, yeah, that's probably a good idea.
How high do you want them?
Right. So when they came to brief me on the mission, I said, okay, I mean, I was brand new, and I said, okay, I got it, I understand this. Well, about 30 minutes before the mission launched, the young lieutenant colonel who was leading the ground force comes running back in, he says, hey, so things have changed. We've just got a new overhead picture of the compound. There are a lot more guys in the compound than we thought. They're a lot more heavily armed. So instead of 2 helicopters and about 30 guys, what we really need is 5 helicopters, about 80 guys. We're going to put 3 helicopters on the outside. 2 helicopters are going to actually land in the compound, and we're probably going to get into a firefight inside the compound in order to get this guy. I was not prepared for any of that. And it was beyond really what I understood and I think what I was capable of saying yes or no to. So after I got all the briefing, I kind of kicked everybody out of the briefing room, and I kept the lieutenant colonel in charge of the ground force, lieutenant colonel who was in charge of the helicopter force, behind, and I sat him down in front of me, and I looked him in the eye, and I said, tell me you can do this. Look me in the eye and tell me you can do this. Tell me, one, that you have managed the risk and that the opportunity of getting this bad guy is, in fact, worth the risk. And they very confidently looked at me and said, we can do this. It's not without risk, but we can do this, and we're going to be okay. So I approved the mission, and they went off, and all the guys came back good. We captured the bad guy. But the lesson for me was I had to rely on the experience of other people at that point in time, even in my military career. And so as I have come into the job of chancellor, people have said, well, you're coming from a military environment, and now, you're in higher education. How does that work? And I said, it works as it does in any leadership position. I have a magnificent staff that works for me, some very senior professionals, seasoned professionals. So when I need to talk to somebody about health, I go to my Executive Vice Chancellor for Health Affairs, Ray Greenberg. When I need to talk about the academic side, I go to Dr. Steve Leslie. When I need to talk about research, I go to Patty Hearn. I mean, there are people I can look in the eye and say, tell me we can do this. And I know that their experience will give me the answer I'm looking for. So I think, kind of back to this, by the time I did the bin Laden raid, I had the experience I needed. But invariably in life, wherever you are, your next job, you're going to walk into it, and you're not going to have all the tools you need to do the job. You have to find, and I notice we recognize the great teachers of the year, you have to find those exceptional teachers. If you're a new teacher, and say, how do you do this? How do I solve this problem? I've got a student in my class that's disruptive. I've got a student who shows up who's tired. How do I deal with some of these problems? Go find somebody who's got the experience, who has done it before, and talk to them and learn from that.
You know, I sit here as a superintendent, and I'm sure members of the audience almost breathless to think that you're here and you led the search and the capture of Osama bin Laden, and that we're honored to have you here. You know, you've done some remarkable things, and while you may appear to want to downplay it, the reality is you've advanced this great country, and we're forever grateful to you, Chancellor, for what you've done. I will say that as I heard you explain what you encountered, you know, for the average person, when you were named the Chancellor of the UT system, you know, we wonder, wow, they brought the Admiral. This is going to get serious here, right? I mean, no professor can hide. We'll find you, right? So I'm sure they were a little nervous, but you've got
They were a little nervous.
a little nervous, and you know, when you say, "Tell me we can do this," and the answer is yes before, you know. But anyway, all right. So here's your next question: which of your life experiences, and you've had many, has most defined you, and how does that experience impact your philosophy regarding leadership?
Yeah, again, I know it sounds a little corny. The poem I read you earlier today by Rudyard Kipling, I really do think it's a great framework for thinking about kind of the challenges that you have to face in life. And if we're going to be stand-up citizens of this great state and this great nation, we have to have some kind of core values. And I'm not going to be here, I'm not here to dictate core values, but what I know is that there are some fundamentals that I think all of our students, and I can tell you from my time in the military, we worked hard with the young men and women that were coming into the military to explain to them what the core values of the military were: honesty and integrity, you know, making sure you did the right thing when nobody was looking. I think these are incredibly important skills. They may be the most important skills for a student to have as they progress through pre-K through 12 and as they come into higher ed and as they go off into the world. And I know it's challenging. It is challenging as a teacher. How do you find the opportunities to instill these core values in your students when some of them may or may not come with those core values when they show up in your classroom? But we in the military encountered the same thing. You know, I've been dealing with the millennials for quite some time now, really since they were the millennials. And I've said before, you know, they come into the military and they don't look anything like I did when I came in or the other. I mean, they are tattooed, they've got earrings, they listen to this music that I can't even comprehend, and yet they are some of the finest young men and women you will ever meet. They are. And you are encountering this new generation, and obviously you've got a little bit of a generational gap between the pre-K and the seniors in high school. But I am convinced that, you know, with the right amount of inspiration that you as teachers provide, with the right amount of leadership that the superintendent and the board of trustees and the senior team provide, with those, we're going to continue to generate these great young men and women, and as a nation, we're going to be just fine. In fact, we're going to excel. I get frustrated, frankly, as I listen to the talking heads on TV about where this nation is going. And I realize we've got some problems, but I got to tell you, I see what happens when you inspire kids. I see what happens when the kids come out of these school districts. And so anybody that thinks that we're in decline hasn't been working with the young men and women that I've been working with. And again, that's not to say we don't have problems. We do. But fixing them starts right here. Starts right here and right now. You know?
So, Chancellor, you've taken on a big role in creating this new university, UTRGV. And there's so much hinging on it. There's so much depending on it. All from, this is the first major project we look at regionally, that we look at things to advance this corridor as a region, and that we press on, and that we do that. As the Chancellor of the UT system, the work you are doing truly exemplifies your understanding that education is a calling, and what we are doing is much bigger than ourselves. Our incoming pre-K students will be the class of 2029. I hope to be the superintendent.
And I hope you are as well.
Thank you, Chancellor. There's a board you might want to look out. Okay, so what do you believe, Chancellor, will be the greatest opportunity they will inherit as part of the work you're doing today, both in our country, but specifically, Chancellor, in our region?
Yeah, and I think you hit on it, Art. It's about opportunity. It is about opportunity. I get back to the discussion I had about the young women in Afghanistan. You know, in the time that we spent in Afghanistan, by the time, and we're there in smaller numbers now, but when the major force left a year or so ago, we had educated 600,000 young women. Wow. 600,000. That will change the face of Afghanistan and the Middle East, because these women, and again, we, in addition to the continuing the male education, but these women will change everything about how the Middle East is. And we may not see it next year, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, but as these young women grow up and they become leaders in Afghanistan and elsewhere, it will change the fabric of the Middle East for the better. It was about opportunity. So, you know, what I would like to do in terms of the University of Texas is to continue to provide opportunity. Opportunity for, you know, from pre-K through higher education. How do we continue to partner not only with Harlingen Consolidated Independent School District, but all the ISDs? How do I make sure we have got a systematic approach so that we're linking higher ed to pre-K through 12? We have to do that because, you know as well as I do, I mean, if you're not reading, you know, if you're not on the mark by third grade, then all of a sudden you're kind of having to fight upstream, if you will. We've got to make sure we invest as a state, as a nation, and provide opportunities. So what UTRGV brings is continued opportunity. So the pre-K that will become, you know, that will come to school in 2029 or graduate in 2029, you know, my hope is that all of those pre-K kids go on to college someplace. And it may not be at the University of Texas, it could be anywhere, it could be a technical school, it could be a community college, but continue their education. So it's about opportunity. We've got to continue to give these young men and women opportunity. But at the same time, we have to set the standard high enough, and we have to hold them and ourselves accountable enough so that when they get that opportunity, they succeed. And so again, I think the challenge that we have is making sure that what we don't do because we know, you know, a young student comes from poverty, or a young student doesn't speak the best English, or a young student comes from a dysfunctional family. What we cannot do is accept that as an excuse and lower the bar so that then what we're doing is we're not creating success. We're going to create failure later on. And we need to do everything we can, I think, to set the bar not too high, but high enough, give them the opportunity, use the great teachers and educators that are out here to continue to inspire and educate, and we'll be okay. If we set the bar too low because we have low expectations, then we'll absolutely hit our low expectations. Let's set the bar high. Let's have high expectations, and let's work hard to achieve them. Give them the opportunity, set the bar high for expectations, and I think, again, you begin to create this incredible tidal wave of talent, of good citizenry that will go on to change, again, not just South Texas, not just Texas, but the nation and the world. And I believe that, or I wouldn't have taken this job.
Couple of final remarks. Let me say that we stand ready to partner, Chancellor, and And HCISD is ready to partner with you because we know that it's good for kids. And I want to thank you for coming to Harlingen and experiencing HCISD.
Thank you very much.
But more importantly, the whole theme was about inspiring and inspiration. You've inspired me, Chancellor.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you for what you do. We really appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Doc.
Great job.
We are a district where we are family, not just a group of educators, staff, and administration.
We come together each day with the best in the world for one goal.
To help students find success anywhere and in any way they choose.
It's a purpose much bigger than ourselves.
And we can never risk becoming content by thinking we've reached the top.
We must be ready to grow and transform.
Because more than 18,000 students rely on us every year.
To educate them and to get them to graduation and beyond.
It's a pretty big responsibility.
With our help, a child can embark on a journey of a lifetime.
They can know that the world is there for their taking, and that possibilities are endless.
A child can see a brighter future for themselves and their families.
These experiences are irreplaceable.
By staying true to our commitment, we become a place where all students can learn.
By offering a world-class education that sets the stage for global achievement.
And together we can be the difference between success and mediocrity.
Between a life of exceeding instead of meeting expectations.
No one educates students better than we do.
We are part of an amazing legacy, brand, and family.
And we must protect that to ensure our future.
And whether we're in the classroom
or in the Information Literacy Center,
in an office, or cafeteria, or anywhere else.
What we've created is worth anything and everything to keep.
Because hardly anyone has it.
And we do.
Together.
Our vision is to remain world-class schools.
Continue excellence.
And help all students succeed.
We inspire and deliver this vision.
We are the heart of our purpose.
We are.
We are.
We are.
We are.
We are HCISD.